This is probably the most complicated out of all of them. So cool. It's like chill chords, but kind of this more happening bass part that kind of makes it really cool and interesting and funky. And this can be really intimidating to look at, I think. You know, when you first look at this bass line, you're like, oh, it's so cool. How do you write bass lines that cool? But let's break it down. First of all, let's look at the chords. These chords are a little bit bigger than your standard chord. It's like two triads stacked on top of each other. You could think of it that way. So this chord is actually called a C sharp minor 11, but really all it is a C sharp minor chord, and then on top of it is a B major chord, kind of like happening at the same time. But it's just stacking those, root, third, fifth, seventh, ninth, and 11th. That's why they call that an 11 chord. Just kind of every other number up there, right? So that's that first chord, and it's just got a cool jazzy vibe to it. And then this one is an F sharp minor 9. Again, it's kind of like two triads stacked on top of each other, but the bottom and top triad kind of share their top and bottom note there. So it's like an F sharp minor with a C sharp minor on top of it. Anyway, don't really need to understand those chords, but I did want to explain them a little bit and just let you know, like, as a bass player, you mostly still think them just like it's a C sharp minor and F sharp minor, so you don't even really worry about this stuff. But I'll show you how Thundercat, he's the name of the bass player on this track, he does incorporate some of these cooler parts of the chords in with his bass line. So first of all, let's look at why it's just, what about it makes it a basic bass part, right? So the first thing, let me zoom in here so you can see the note names. The first two chords here, I'm going to make the screen just a little bit bigger too here. Okay, so the first two chords here are just two C sharps, right? And if you'll notice, he hits a C sharp, steps away from it, and then back to the C sharp twice, right? So da-da, do-da-da, that's really basic, right? And then in the next measure, he waits, right? It's kind of like Bob Marley waited too. And then he does the same thing where he kind of like starts on the step below and then goes up to the C, and then he does this cool walk down, and this note that he walks down to is an E, which you might be like, oh, that's crazy. And it's from the chord though still, right? It's that second note from the chord. It's just played down low, right? So it comes from the root and do-do-do-doom, lands on that third, right? Instead of just going down to the fifth, he goes one step further, which is kind of cool. And then he walks up to the B, which, just to kind of point this out, that's another note from the chord. If you look, like there's the G sharp, and there's the B right there, right? So even though he's doing like these really kind of cool, crazy fills, his note choices are not really random. They're really centered around the other notes that are in the chord, right? And so that's just a cool thing to kind of notice, that it's not a totally random thing, right? Let's look at this next part. This is another really cool thing too. So the chord changes here. Finally, it's an F sharp chord now, right? And what's the first note he plays on the bass? Ding, F sharp, one octave down, right? Also, I just wanted to point out while we're on the F sharp, also he hits the F sharp there again. So when just right about when the chord changes there, and another F sharp there, and there, and there, right? So it's still very F sharp rooted right there, right? And then in between we got some more walking stuff, right? So let's look at this first walk. He walks all the way up to this G sharp, which is kind of a crazy note to choose. If you look at the chord though, what's the top note in the chord? A G sharp, right? So it's kind of like he walks up to that top note, and then D, 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 E, C sharp, F, E, C sharp, back to the root, right? So he's just pulling out chord tones through all that. There's actually not very many passing tones in that. A lot of it comes right out of the chord. And then right at the end, a little standard walk up that's going to help get us back to our C sharp, right? So that connects in so well with the end there. And so, like I say, it's not to take away from the bass part. It is genius and it's super groovy and funky, but it's also kind of just makes sense, right? It's like, oh yeah, that would make sense to do all those things. Usually great bass lines are that way. When you break them down, it's like, oh yes, that like 90% of that totally makes sense, and the other 10% is magic. Um, anyway, I just wanted to spend some time on that just to show you that. So get some ideas on your own bass parts. I've got this chord progression. My number one here, real basic. I just went for 4 chords: C, F minor, A sharp major or B flat major, and C sharp minor, or no, major on the end there. Okay. So when I get to writing a bass for this, the first thing I'm probably going to do is, in fact, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to copy this chord progression, so Command C, and I'll paste it on the bass. Now that's silly because I don't really want to play the chords on my bass, but let's rename this number 1 bass. And this is my first idea, so we'll call it bass 1, number 1 bass 1. And the first thing I'm going to do is just take all these chords, select them all, and I'm just going to drag it all down 1 octave, right? So it's 1 octave lower. So instead of being C3 that it starts out, it now starts on C2, okay? And then I'm going to change my grid to 1/8, give me some space to work with. And then look, these are all my notes in the chords already ready to roll, right? So I know I'm probably not going to use this one. Whoops. Unselect everything. I'm probably not going to use this middle note very much. If I decide to, it's going to be, really little, but I'm not going to do it at all on this first one. I'm just roots and fifths, okay? So let's just shorten this up and maybe move that out. And you can kind of see, like, this is just a good approach to, like, kind of get you started so that you've got the right notes that you're working with, and you're just going to start messing around with rhythms and roots and fifths and some walking notes, right? So you don't need to do everything on every bass line. So maybe, for this first one, let's just stick to like some cool roots and fifths and do some rhythmic displacement too, right? So I'll duplicate that. Maybe let's see what that sounds like. So I'm going to cue these up here. I've got this other idea in this line that I need to get rid of. Let's just shove it up somewhere else, right? Actually, no. I'm just going to mute this track. And that one. Okay, so let's play this and see what that sounds like. Oh, it's still. Just gotta open up my group and mute all those ones in the group. Okay, so let's play these two. Cool, let's mess around with the groove. Since I showed it to you earlier, click on that little thing, bring up our groove library. Let's try some hip hop. How about? I wonder what a loosely flow. Oh, that's kind of cool. NY cut. Let's try that one. So just double click on it, or you can click and drag it down there too. You can see the groove now says NY cut, and it won't change how your grid looks, but it will change how these bass notes play when they play, especially the ones that are in between, like the beats. Cool, yeah, it's just got a little bit more kind of groove to it, right? So what you need to do for this final step is you need to make 2 bass lines for each of your 1 chord progressions. So I would need to make another bass line here, and then there, and then there. And I'll go ahead and name these while I'm thinking about it. This is going to be number 1 bass 2, and then this will be number 2 bass 1, and number 2 to base 2. Okay. So, try and keep it nice and organized like this. I mean, if you want, you can even kind of color coordinate some things too. Like my reggae is yellow, so maybe I want to change these to yellow also. I'm just 2-finger tapping on that. Oh, it looks like it's this darker yellow. You definitely don't need to do that, but man, it sure does help with my brain when I'm looking at your projects and trying to figure out what is what. Um, so anyway, at least horizontally line them up and name them so that I can clearly see, like, okay, they are meaning that base to go with that and that and that, so that I can hear them clearly. Okay, and of course, email me if you have any questions or ask any of the helpers for help. And that should get you there. When you're turning this in, I need your .als file submitted. And that's it. I don't need an MP3 or anything, just the ALS. Okay, good luck.